I was meant to be on a plane to Portland, heading to my sister's lake house for the holidays. My suitcase was checked in and my boarding pass tucked in my pocket. But as I pulled into the long-term parking lot, something stopped me cold. I had left behind the original will, Arthur's will, the real one, not the copy I kept tucked in the desk drawer. I turned the car around thinking it would take 5 minutes at most, but what I walked into was a sound no mother should ever hear. Not in her own home, not from her only child. The front door groaned softly when I pushed it open. I didn't call out. The air inside felt too still. My keys rested in my palm, but I didn't drop them in the bowl like I always did. Something in my chest went quiet. I stepped into the hallway. My shoes brushing the wood floor, the voices came from the study. Low, measured, careful. I paused behind the archway, back pressed against the wall, barely breathing. "If she's showing signs, we can make the case," said a voice I knew too well. "Grant, she's 74, another voice replied. "With the right paperwork, diminished capacity isn't hard to prove." Ash, that was the name, the lawyer Grant had brought around after Arthur passed, under the guise of helping organize Dad's things. My heart thudded slow and heavy. I couldn't see them, but I felt the shape of their words. They were talking about guardianship. About me. Grant continued. "I've already started a list. She's been losing things, repeating stories. Barely touched her taxes last year. I wanted to step forward and shout his name, but instead I edged backward carefully. I didn't want the floorboards to betray me. Outside, the afternoon sun was warm, but everything inside me had gone cold. I got back into my car, staring through the windshield, the keys still in my hand. The woman who raised him, who worked nights in archives so he could go to college debt-free, was now being catalogued like a case file. I pressed my lips together, not in anger, in disbelief. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not shattered yet, but the warmth in my chest, what little remained, began to cool. And you know what hurt the most? It wasn't what I heard. It was realizing how long I'd ignored what I already knew. If you've ever watched your child turn into a stranger in your own home, you'll understand. This was the day I stopped being a mother first and began becoming something else entirely. Let me take you there. I didn't return to the airport. I didn't call my sister. I just drove. My hands stayed steady on the wheel, but my mind drifted. I passed the turnoff to the interstate, letting instinct lead me down old streets I hadn't seen in decades. By the time I parked, I was in front of a bakery, tucked between a laundromat and a faded barber shop. The awning was new, but the smell drifting from the open door was the same: cinnamon, butter, toasted almonds. This was the spot Arthur brought me every Sunday, rain or shine. Back when we lived in a 2-bedroom apartment off Union Street, back when Grant was still a scrape-knee boy, full of ideas and inventions, I stepped inside. The counter had been replaced with something sleek, but the tables remained mismatched, each with a small vase of flowers. I ordered a coffee and sat by the window, my fingers curled around the cup, seeking warmth, something to anchor me. My eyes wandered to the sidewalk. People passed in thick coats, heads down, moving quickly. I remembered Arthur reading the paper at this very table, while Grant stacked sugar packets into towers. He used to ask questions about everything: bridges, trains, how elevators worked. He didn't want simple answers. He wanted blueprints, and I gave them to him. I brought books from the library and circled paragraphs in pencil. Signed him up for robotics camp before he even asked. He was curious, not entitled, at least back then, somewhere between that boy and the man I overheard this morning. Something changed, not overnight, not suddenly, like a kettle left too long on the stove. The steam began quietly, then hissed until the room filled with it. I remembered when he insisted on handling Arthur's estate, told me it was too much for me. When he replaced our family accountant with a firm I'd never heard of. When he set up automatic payments for my property taxes without asking. I had seen the signs, but I had given him the benefit of the doubt. A tired mother's trust, a widow's hope. Now it all snapped into place, like puzzle pieces forced into the wrong spots. Suddenly the picture was clear. I left the bakery after finishing half my coffee. The taste lingered bitter on my tongue. Not from the beans, from memory. Outside the sky had turned gray. I zipped my coat up to my chin and paused. I wasn't ready to go home yet, not out of fear, but to remember who I had been before I let others define me. This quiet detour was the beginning. The parking lot behind the library was mostly empty. Late afternoon, the sky already slipping into early winter gray. I pulled into the spot I used to choose when I worked there. Muscle memory, old habits. I sat for a moment, watching the branches of the big oak sway gently in the wind. Inside, everything was quieter than I remembered. The carpets had been replaced, checkout stations upgraded. But the smell was the same, ink dust and old wood. A scent that always made me feel calm, capable, whole. I walked past the fiction stacks, straight to the archives. It hadn't changed much. Tall filing cabinets, beige overhead lights that flickered if you stared too long. I nodded to the young woman at the desk, asking if I could review a document I had once catalogued, a copy of my husband's will. She didn't question me, slid a clipboard forward, and pointed me to a corner table. I found the file without trouble. My hands remembered where to look. The folder was thick, not because of the will, but because of Arthur's notes. He had always annotated everything, margins filled with RO's dates, abbreviations in his clipped handwriting. It made sense to him, and over the years, it had come to make sense to me too. I spread the pages carefully, scanning each line. The will was intact, nothing crossed out. But what caught my eye were the sticky notes he left inside the folder. One read Dolores, "If you ever feel unsure, the answer is always in the numbers." I flipped to the last page. There was a chart, an itemized list of assets, property, investments, bonds. Next to each entry was a note. D to retain, D or grant if qualified. Legal hold until independent review, not grant to manage, not full access for son. Arthur had been meticulous. He had trusted me. I felt a warmth rise in my chest, not from anger, from recognition, from memory, from the sensation of finally slipping back into my own skin. I pulled a notepad from my bag and began a list. First copies, second legal counsel, third audit of recent account changes. I underlined each item with deliberate pressure. By the time I left the library, the sun had slipped below the rooftops. The sky had turned a soft navy. The cold didn't faze me. I walked to the car with intention. My breath formed little clouds in front of me. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel old, confused, or managed. I felt like Dolores Whitaker, the woman who used to organize rare collections, who could recite policy from memory, who once found a lost Revolutionary War letter behind a broken file cabinet, and who would now navigate her way back through this, one document at a time. That morning I moved slowly, not from aches, but to let the illusion of control feel real. I tucked a small voice recorder into the lining of my coat, one I had used during library interviews, barely thumb-sized. A soft click to start recording. I watched for the red light to blink, then slipped it into the wool. I left the door unlocked. The sun was high enough to cast long shadows across the kitchen floor. I turned off the overhead lights, letting the natural light quietly do its work. I made tea, spilled just a bit on the counter, left the kettle slightly ajar. Subtle messes, the kind that could be mistaken for forgetfulness. By 10:30 Grant showed up. I hadn't asked him to. He rarely called before appearing these days. He walked in with a grocery bag and that careful smile he used when he wanted something. I sat at the kitchen table in my robe, a half-filled crossword in front of me, a pen without a cap. I looked up slowly. He kissed my cheek, commented on how chilly it felt. I nodded, said I must have forgotten to turn on the heat. He set down the bag, pulled out soup, a loaf of bread, and a tin of crackers. The performance began. He asked about my sleep. I said I wasn't sure, then changed the subject mid-sentence. I let my hands fumble with the spoon. When he offered to warm the soup, I smiled and said yes, as if it were a favor. Grant moved through the kitchen like someone taking inventory. His eyes swept the calendar, the pills by the sink, the unopened mail. He mentioned a letter from the insurance company. I said I hadn't gotten to it. He offered to handle it for me. I pretended not to hear. After lunch he leaned against the doorframe, watched me for a long moment. Then he said something that confirmed what I already knew. He had been researching care homes, just options, places with gardens, music therapy, staff trained in memory care. He said it softly, as if it were kind. I blinked, then smiled faintly. Said it might be nice to have someone else cook. Then I asked him the date. He looked satisfied. As he packed up the dishes, I sat quietly, staring out the window. The recorder had been running the whole time. Every word, every pause, every calculated kindness. After he left, I locked the door, sat in the study, took off my coat, and set the recorder on the desk. My hands didn't shake. In silence, I replayed the moment in my mind, not out of anger, but precision, because now I had more than memory. I had evidence. The silence, once unbearable, had become my greatest ally. The next morning, I found Leland's old number in a yellow Rolodex, tucked behind my cookbook shelf. I hadn't spoken to her in years, not because we drifted, but because life folded in on itself after Arthur passed. We had worked together 15 years at the university library. She was sharp, always a step ahead. She had a way of spotting the flaw in a plan before it collapsed. I called and left a message, my voice calm, direct. I told her I needed a legal mind I could trust, and that it was personal. Within the hour she texted back. She'd be at my house by 4. When she arrived, her presence filled the room without overwhelming it. She wore a navy wool coat, hair in a tight knot. Grounded, no pleasantries, no forced smiles. We sat at the kitchen table. I poured chamomile tea into mismatched cups. I slid the recorder and a file across to her. No explanations, just quiet. She listened to the recording. her expression unchanged. When it ended, she looked at me and said, "We're going to fix this." She opened her laptop, her fingers moving fast. She asked about my power of attorney. If it had been updated since Arthur passed, I said no. She nodded. "First thing we'd do was revoke Grant's authority. Then draft a new will, designate a trusted executor, notify the state of the changes, everything documented, time-stamped." She asked about digital backups. I said none. She said we'd fix that too. Over the next hour, she outlined a plan, clean, quiet, legal, everything Grant assumed I'd forgotten. I was about to rewrite. Mellon was precise but never cold. Not surprised. She had seen this before, not necessarily with children, but with those who thought access meant ownership. We moved to the den. She scanned copies of Arthur's annotated will, helped me set up encrypted cloud storage, even created a folder labeled Dolores Legal Private. She explained how to update entries, where to store medical reports, which versions to retain before leaving. She placed a single sheet before me, a formal revocation of power of attorney. My name, his name, the date. I signed it. She slid the paper into her briefcase. Her final words were simple. "This is the first step." After she left, I sat by the window, watching the bare dogwood branches sway in the wind. The house was quiet again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was the sound of something solid being rebuilt, one decision at a time, one document at a time, one version of myself at a time, and I wasn't alone anymore. The following days unfolded with quiet precision. Leland had given me a checklist. By the second morning, I no longer needed it. The rhythm of protecting myself became routine. Like archiving, when each document told its own story, and my job was to preserve it. I began with my medical records. I scheduled an appointment with Dr. Elkins, the same physician I'd seen for over a decade. During the visit, I requested a cognitive evaluation, not because I doubted myself, but because I wanted it documented. Dr. Elkins didn't question me. He ran the assessment, checked my reflexes, reviewed my chart, then handed me a signed letter. Cognitively sound, no signs of impairment. I folded it carefully, slid it into the folder I carried in my bag. Back home, I gathered everything that proved my mental clarity. Grocery receipts, bank statements with handwritten notes, printed emails from the past 2 years. I made lists, dated every page, organized them into categories: legal, medical, personal. I labeled the folders the way I used to label historical collections. Clear, consistent, irrefutable. I scanned each page into the cloud storage. Leland had guided me twice. Now I could do it with my eyes closed. I used a scanner she lent me, small but fast. Every file saved with a timestamp. Each document a small brick in the wall I was building. Between me and the version of myself Grant thought I had become. In the back of my closet, behind old winter coats and an unused suitcase, I found a box labeled Arthur Mace. Inside were letters, mostly notes from their early marriage, grocery lists, quick reminders, little hearts beside his name. One stood out, a single page in his bold handwriting. Dated 10 years ago, no envelope, folded into quarters. Stuck between travel brochures, it read, "If the day comes when our son makes you doubt yourself, trust your instinct. You've always seen clearer than you believe." I sat on the edge of the bed, letter in my lap, the house still, my heart steady, wine brushing against the windows like fingertips. Arthur had known, not the details, but the possibility. He had seen what I wasn't ready to see. I was ready now, that night. I backed up everything again, sent copies to Mlellan, stored a flash drive in the safety deposit box, added a final note to my journal. There is no such thing as overprepared when someone is trying to erase you. I slept without turning the hallway light on. For the first time in weeks, I didn't wake to check the locks. I had done the work. I was no longer playing defense. I was documenting my survival in my own handwriting, in real time. He showed up on Wednesday. I hadn't heard the car, but the doorbell rang just after noon. I took a slow breath, walked to the door without rushing. Grant stood there, holding a paper bag in one hand, a small bouquet of supermarket tulips in the other. He smiled, the same soft expression he wore when caught sneaking a snack before dinner. I stepped aside and let him in. Without a word, the tulips were yellow. I thanked him, placed them in the old green vase on the dining table. He commented on how quiet the house was, said it felt peaceful. I agreed. He unpacked the bag in the kitchen. Without asking, vegetable soup, a crusty roll, a chocolate bar. I offered to heat the soup. He waved me off and did it himself. He moved through the kitchen like he belonged there, as he always had. We sat at the table. He asked about my sleep. I said some nights were better than others. He nodded. Asked if I had considered hiring someone to check in once or twice a week. I said it might not be a bad idea. I let my spoon linger in the broth. Hands slower than usual. He watched me closely, like someone watching a dial they just adjusted. Then he talked about places he'd looked into. Assisted living communities with wellness programs, walking paths, private rooms. He said it gently, as if it were just a suggestion. Said I deserved rest. It wasn't safe to be alone too much. I looked down, ran my fingers along the napkin edge, said I would consider it. His face softened, maybe even relieved, when he offered to drive me to tour one of the places next week. I smiled and said perhaps, then asked him to remind me what day it was. He told me. I nodded like I'd forgotten. I let the pause stretch. He stayed another half hour. Walked through the hallway as if checking for things I might have missed. Pointed out a flickering light bulb in the laundry room. Mentioned the porch railing looked loose. I took note of everything he observed. Before leaving, he touched my shoulder gently. Said he just wanted the best for me. I placed my hand over his and said I knew. As soon as the door closed, I walked to the back window, watched him sit in his car. He stayed a while, typing into his phone, mouth moving slightly as if rehearsing. I turned into the study. The small recorder on the bookshelf had been running since he arrived. Every sentence, every suggestion, every careful word archived. Later that evening, I uploaded the file. Labeled it Visit Grant Assisted Living Discussion. The performance nearly perfect. But so was the record. The next morning, I rearranged the living room, not because it needed it, but to make space under the side table for a second recording device. Placement mattered. He often paced near the window when nervous. I tested the angle, ensured the microphone would catch any porch conversation. I left the front door unlocked, a gesture of openness, of vulnerability. Then I moved slowly through the kitchen, deliberately leaving little signs of forgetfulness. Refrigerator slightly open. Measuring cup in the sink. Tousled hair in the hallway mirror. Just enough to look careless. At 10:40. His car pulled in again. He came up the steps humming. I stepped onto the porch. Cardigan pulled tightly around my shoulders. Asked what brought him back. He said he was in the neighborhood. Just checking in. Handed me a packet from the care center he'd mentioned before. I held it with both hands. Fingers shook slightly. Did not open it immediately. Instead, I sat on the porch swing. Asked the time. He smiled. Answered softly. Sat beside me. I glanced at the folder. Whispered that the pictures looked nice. He leaned in, describing walking paths and music room, like selling a vacation home. Then he mentioned the paperwork. Said he had spoken to someone named Ashby, a legal advisor he trusted. Ashby could help file the necessary documents. He wanted everything in place to avoid confusion. I nodded slowly, kept eyes on the street. He stepped away to take a call. I heard his voice drift through the open window. He spoke clearly, not loudly. Ashby's name came up again, along with phrases like expedited review and mental competence. He mentioned next week. Said I was close to ready. I sat still. Not stiff, not rigid, just quiet. The porch mic caught every word. When he returned, he brought me a cup of tea. I thanked him, asked if we had discussed this last time. He smiled, proud of me for remembering. Then he asked if I wanted to visit the center on Thursday. I said I would think about it. I sipped the tea, let it linger. Said the flavor reminded me of something Arthur used to make. He nodded silently, said he would call tomorrow, after he left. I disconnected the porch mic carefully, uploaded the new file to the archive folder, labeled it clearly. Later that night, Mellon came by, brought her tablet. We transferred everything to two encrypted backups. I showed her notes Grant left in the care center brochure. He had circled a line in the admissions policy. Transfer of medical proxy contingent on observed need. She looked at me, handed me a folder. Inside, a sworn affidavit confirming my legal and medical capacity. Signed by Dr. Elkins and two notaries. The game had shifted. Grant believed he was closing in, but I was already documenting every move, for the first time in a long while. I felt not just surviving, but preparing to be seen. 3 days after Grant's last visit, Mellon submitted the formal response to Ashby's office, the envelope heavy with documentation, affidavit of mental capacity, newly notarized power of attorney, updated will, written notice declaring all prior authorizations null, everything logged, time-stamped, signed in duplicate. It wasn't a declaration of war. It was a shield. She delivered it in person. Quiet visit. Downtown legal complex. Ashby's firm on the second floor above a dental office. Left it with the receptionist, asking only that it be placed in his hands. Then she walked away. That evening she called, her voice calm, something unreadable beneath it. Ashby had called personally, not to argue, not to defend, but said he had reviewed everything carefully, would be stepping back from the situation. Without prompting, he added that Arthur had once done him a favor, during a time few others would, not a confession, but enough to leave a crack in the wall Grant built. I sat with the call, replayed it in my head, pulled out Arthur's handwritten note again, traced the last line with my thumb. The next day, I received a letter by courier. Not from Grant, from Ash. A short note came on heavy letterhead. In it, He said he would step back from anything to do with my estate. Tucked inside was a meticulous record of every document filed in my name over the past half year, including the ones Grant had set in motion. Every date, digital log, draft, and email was there in black and white. I spent the better part of the afternoon going through each line. Some phrases caught me. I'd heard them before, word for word, across the table over soup. Now they lived inside a draft concern statement tied to a guardianship petition. There were even ready-made affidavit templates for neighbors or friends to note signs of my supposed memory problems. He'd been building a case quietly, piece by piece, and now I was holding the blueprint. I called Mellon. We agreed she'd write a short, formal notice. If Grant moved again legally, it would be filed immediately. Not a threat, but a clear message. Any attempt to sidestep my rights would be on record as overreach and coercion. That evening, I put Ash's letter in the nightstand drawer next to Arthur's note. To men, one who tried to erase me in silence, and one who left just enough light to guide me home. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady, like I'd finally stepped out of holding space into open air. The stillness in the house no longer pressed against me. It stood beside me now, solid, waiting. Grant showed up without a call or text, just the crunch of gravel and the slow swing of the gate. I'd been expecting him. That letter from Ash had shifted the ground, and I knew he wouldn't wait long to try and regain his grip. I watched through the window as he came up the walk with a folder under one arm. His steps were measured, but his shoulders were tight. The mask of concern was still there, stretched thin over something sharper. When I opened the door, I didn't pretend to be surprised. I simply stepped aside and let him in. He followed me into the kitchen, remarking on the cinnamon in the air. I'd simmered cider on purpose, letting the scent travel through the house. He stayed on his feet, placing the folder on the table like he was waiting for a signal. I poured 2 cups, slid one toward him, and sat down across from him. The space between us felt formal, almost ritual. He spoke softly about Ash's sudden withdrawal, how it left matters uncertain. I nodded. He said he worried about certain papers being altered without his knowledge. I took a sip of cider. Then I reached into the side drawer and took out a small pile of documents, clean copies, nothing dramatic, just facts. The new power of attorney, the revised will, a letter from Dr. Elkins, a notarized affidavit of my capacity. I pushed them toward him, one at a time. He didn't touch them. He just looked. I met his eyes, not with anger or fear, but with clarity. I told him I had made my own decisions, legal and responsible ones. I said I knew exactly what I was doing, and pretending otherwise wouldn't change that. He stayed quiet. His jaw moved once, his gaze skimming over the pages again before drifting toward the hallway. I wondered if he was searching for signs, evidence I wasn't alone, or that I was bluffing. Then I told him, not all silence means weakness. He stood there a beat longer. Then he gathered the stack, set it back down without folding a page, and walked to the door. No slam, no parting words. Just the sound of the latch and his steps fading down the path. When the engine noise was gone, I returned to the table. I reached under the napkin holder for the recorder, switched it off, and named the file in my head. Quiet confrontation. Full clarity. That night, I didn't dream about Grant's childhood, Arthur's voice, or courthouse echoes. I dreamed of a room in perfect order, boxes labeled, ledgers straight, a window open to cold, clean air. For the first time in years, my choices belonged solely to me, and that was enough. The stillness in the house began to change, not with noise, but with presence. Leland's daughter, Tessa, arrived just past noon on a sunny Saturday. She carried a canvas duffel, a laptop case, and moved through the hallway like she'd always belonged here. She wasn't loud, and she didn't pry. In the small guest room, she unpacked with quiet assurance, plugging in her hard drive, stacking binders, lining up textbooks. She was studying archival science, and she already spoke with that calm, precise rhythm I remembered from my years at the university. By evening, the house felt different. She offered to make tea, standing in my kitchen as if it were hers. She hummed while the kettle warmed, a folk song I hadn't heard in decades. Lemon verbena drifted through the hallway. That night, I heard her typing a slow, steady, almost like Arthur's old typewriter in the basement. It anchored me. Within days, she slipped into the house's rhythm. She took the trash out without a word, printed labels for my photo albums, asked if she could digitize the notebooks from my library years. She handled everything with care, never for show. On the third day, I gave her the legal folder, copies only, the affidavit, POA updated will, and audio transcripts. She saved them on an encrypted drive, set up backups, and stored them in a secure academic cloud. Brent called that night. I saw his name and let it ring, no message. Later, Tessa asked if I wanted to help label the garage boxes in the morning. I said yes. It felt like saying yes to more than cardboard and tape, yes to motion, to living beyond defense. The rooms no longer echoed when I walked. The kitchen bore fingerprints again. The floors needed sweeping more often, and I welcomed it. That night I wrote one line in my journal. The house is no longer quiet, and neither am I. The morning air felt changed. The trees outside moved with a calm certainty, as if they knew something had ended and something else begun. I sat at my desk with my journal, the one I'd kept since Arthur passed. Its pages had thickened, not just with words but with certainty. I thought about how far I'd come, not in miles, but in the slow, deliberate walk back to myself. No shouting, no final slam door, just small choices, stacked like stones on a path I built alone. On the last page, the ink moved steadily. Let him speak first, then watch him fall. I closed the journal, slid it beside Arthur's letter, and tucked the key into my sweater pocket. The kitchen was warm. Tessa had gone to campus early, but her teacup still sat in the sink, steam gone, but memory intact. I walked through the house, fingertips brushing the walls. The photos were back in place. The rug by the front door held a crease where her bag had landed too often. The hallway lamp flickered once, then settled. Outside, wind pushed softly at the glass. I stood at the window, watching leaves turn gold on one side, green on the other. No announcement, no audience. But I knew something had ended, not my story, just the chapter where I waited for someone else to decide its shape. And that was enough. If this story stays with you, maybe it's because you've felt that silence too, the kind that isn't weakness, but endurance. If you've ever been dismissed or made to doubt your own voice, let this be your reminder. Dignity asks no permission. You're not alone in that quiet strength. You never were.